Tempest future. So, first thing I want to say is that I think Achever Clausewitz represents the fourth stage in Girard's thinking. First stage was the literary stage, the second stage was the anthropological stage, the third stage was the biblical theological stage, and now we have the historical stage. And this is very significant for people who are interested in research into Girard's work. And I urge people to get on board the historical bandwagon now as it begins down the street. Second thing is that I identify with Clausewitz because I too am afraid that war might disappear. Now put that in Girardian terms, I mean, I'm afraid that violence might disappear from mimetic theory, swallowed up in a kind of benign literary mimesis. And finally, from the great theory of original sin will itself be expelled, and that is violence, which is the heart and secret soul not only of the sacred, but of mimetic theory. And so, along with Clausewitz and Heraclitus, which is cited in the page 12 of Achever Clausewitz, the famous 43rd fragment of Heraclitus, war is the father of all things and the king of all. That is the truth of pre-Socratic Greek insight, and it is the truth of Clausewitz, and it is the truth of mimetic theory. Because after all, the world in which we live and theorize is ruled over by someone called the Prince of this world. And the apocalypse of Christianity, namely the revelation, the uncovering of the truth of the world, is stated there symbolically in the cross. And what is the cross? It is the image of the slow torturing to death of a young man. During Lent this year, I went around making speeches entitled From Golgotha to Guantanamo. And what does this apocalypse tell us? It tells us that war really is the father and creator and king of all things, and that we are the kind of pathetic species that not only enjoys tormenting animals, but actually gets bigger jollies out of torturing young men to death. Okay? So let me repeat this. I'm dreadfully afraid that war and violence will disappear from mimetic theory. Because if it does, well then, bye-bye, lights out, let's all go back home and pretend that there's nothing wrong with the human race, which is what the university has been doing ever since the Enlightenment. So, okay, and the last thing I want to say is that Paul Carangella pointed out to us in our Friday Girard seminar that Clausewitz occurs in War and Peace. He writes through at least 2 pages of War and Peace. Yeah, that is Tolstoy's War and Peace. So, Apocalypse, the revelation of the prince of this world and the structure of sacred violence within which war is king. And others will talk further about this. And by the way, if you want to talk about good mimesis, if you want to talk about the imitatio Christi in the Apostle Paul, you understand, of course, you're talking in the realm not of this world, but of the kingdom of God. This is the world of the new creation. And the new creation has not yet come. So anybody who talks about good mimesis is in a sense anticipating the second coming of Christ, which of course is what the gospel is. You can anticipate it in the Eucharist and in the preaching and in the attempt to live the imitatio Christi, but you must know that you are living in the world not of nature but of grace. Not the kingdom of Prince of this world, but the kingdom of the Prince of Peace. Thank you.
I will start with a word of thanks to my neo-Austrian friend Simon de Keukela, who helped me to get some first insight to the French book of René Girard. The fascinating thing reading Clausewitz is that Clausewitz has two sides on war. On the one hand, a very nice, benign, instrumental understanding of war. War is nothing but the continuation of policy. On the other hand, an existential understanding which comes very close to mimetic theory because he understands mimetic rivalry. That means the escalation of violence to the utmost extreme. I think that's the most interesting thing to think about. And I think today it's very appropriate that we study Clausewitz carefully because we are in a time of escalation. We are in a time of escalation. I give you one figure of this mimetic rivalry between global terrorism and wars against terror or wars on terror. Recently, there were figures published about the escalation of casualties in Afghanistan and figures about attacks. In the first 3 months of this year, there were 704 Taliban attacks in Afghanistan, causing 463 civilians dead. And it's about the double size of attacks and dead people compared to the first 3 months in 2007. And I think you can also see some kind of escalation beginning from 9/11 to today between the jihadist terrorists and American response in some way. So I would say we are living, as Bob already said, in apocalyptic times. So as a theologian and ethicist, I'm mostly interested in what do we have to do. There are new types of policies, of course, necessary, but I think we also need religious answers. Pope John Paul II in his last encyclical Centesimus Annus in 1991 addressed that situation very carefully. He said, we have to walk the narrow path between cowardice, which gives in to evil, a little bit the European attitude today towards those problems. And the other side is violence, which under the illusion of fighting evil only makes it worse. That means it contributes to escalation. And John Paul II was, when he talked about that, referring to the non-violent revolution of 1989 and says to go this narrow path you need some kind of spirituality, prayer, religious strength in some way. And so I would like to conclude probably with 2 or 3 short remarks about are there potentials for de-escalation in our religious traditions? Of course there are very strong potentials if you just think about the Christian tradition, about the Sermon on the Mount, about this strong emphasis on not to retaliate, not going for revenge, and strengthening non-violence. But what I want to emphasize today very consciously is we should not only look for potentials for de-escalation in Christian tradition, we have also to strengthen people in other religions to strengthen their potentials for de-escalation. About a month ago I was in Iran, so meeting one of the enemy states of the United States, and I met there philosophers, theologians, some of them who are interested in a non-Islamic tradition of nonviolence, and they referred me to one article by a Muslim scholar, Jawad Said, who wrote a 60-page essay, an English essay, you can easily have access to that, in which he writes a new understanding of the Quran and Islam, emphasizing de-escalation, emphasizing non-violence, and in an Augustinian way, he starts to read the whole history of humankind